Welcome to Pushing the Boundaries of Midi with Guitar.com Live. My name is Mark Johnston from Secret Weapons Demos and Ambient Notes, and I am here with three of my favorite kind of Midi genius guys from three different amazing aspects of that industry. So let's have you guys kind of intro yourselves.
All right. Hey guys, I'm Ben. I'm from Morningstar Engineering, and we make MIDI foot controllers specifically for pedalboard users and guitar effects players. So yeah, I'm here today to share a bit on how you can use MIDI in your rig and how it can help you take your music playing to the next level.
Cool. So I'm Lockie from Effects, and so I make things like this. So yeah, the Digit and the Bebo, which are both, they can take MIDI in and out, generate it from their internal control voltage stuff. And I used to make a bunch of other weird MIDI controllers. I made Expressive, which was the touch panel foot thing. And before that, I also made a bunch of MIDI polyphonic expression controllers. So ones for synthesizers, per note, weird laser stuff, and other things like that.
That's awesome. And for the record, I have the Poly Digit / Bebo, and it is one of the most fascinating, deep, dense, and yet accessible because that touchscreen interface is genius. Pieces that I own. Last but not least, we have Paul with one of my favorite titles of any person who's got a cool job title I've ever heard. So take it away.
I don't know where the title came from of MIDI Guru, but I think Joel branded me with that. But my name is Paul Ewell. I'm in Tacoma, Washington, where it's 5 p.m. And I've been with Chase Bliss Audio for almost 5 years now. This November will be 5 years. And I do a lot of things for Chase Bliss, but mostly handle support emails for MIDI and just try to help people integrate MIDI into their rig. Most of the troubleshooting I do are people who are new to MIDI. So it's just a matter of like, just trying to help people out, get over that first hump that most people just reach that first hump and they just run, I did it. We've all done it, but you can get through that. So that's what I try to do.
I think this is actually a really good jumping off point. You talk about the fact that most of the emails and support that you do is based around kind of those first steps in MIDI and everything.
Seems to be, yeah.
You as somebody who is a quote unquote MIDI guru, whether or not that's a real job title, I'm going to assume it is because it's just awesome. How did you kind of get into that side of guitar playing and that side of the signal chain stuff? Because I think a lot of guitar players can go decades without ever dipping their foot into anything basic preset control, and even then they're afraid of MIDI. So how did you get from that first step into where you are right now?
I never really thought of it, but while you were talking, I came up with like the answer. It's kind of funny how that happens. But so before I was using multi-effect boards, like individual pedals, I was using back in like 99, like a Boss GT3 or GT5 or something maybe. So I was used to like when you hit one button on that thing, your overdrive changes, your delay changes, your mod, everything changes. Reverbs, everything, modulations, everything, just with one little touch. And then when I started using individual pedals, I missed that. It's like, well, this sucks. Like you're at a gig and you have to hit like 5 different things, to go into the chorus of a song. So I picked up, I think my first controller was a Boss ES8, not even that long ago. And I had a bunch of Strymon boxes, big, like Timeline, Big Sky, stuff like that, Mobius. And I jumped online. I'm like, okay, somebody will have a video on how to get this running. And I found absolutely nothing. So I had to just do it myself. And I put out, I think the first video showing how to connect like big box Strymons to a Boss ES8. And then it kind of, I don't know, I'm trying to like make this shorter, but it gave me that multi-effect feel that I had with the first designs that I had, like the Boss GT3. So that's kind of what I was going for, was that. And then I bought a warped vinyl 5 years ago, and it was going to be the only Chase Bliss pedal I was ever going to buy. And I emailed Chase Bliss because I didn't want to buy their little MIDI box. You know, I was like, I don't want any of your other pedals. I just want to be able to connect this pedal to MIDI, and I don't want to. Can I just make like a 5-DIN MIDI to TRS cable? And Joel emails me back. I emailed the company. I didn't know I was emailing Joel. Just thought I was emailing like somebody. Joel emails me back and he says, that's not going to work. And I said, well, can I harm anything if I try? And he goes, no, you're not going to harm anything, but I'll just tell you, don't waste your time. It's not going to work. It's never going to work. So I got it to work, of course. Emailed him the next day, showed a little video, and he's like, you want a job? And I was like, what? I have one, but yeah, I'll take another one. Why not? Right? Chase Bliss. So yeah, I mean, the rest is history. So it's like, I remember what it was like to get into MIDI. And so whenever someone emails me wanting to do the same thing, it just brings back that, oh, I was so stuck, you know? And so I love to help people like that.
Coming from a place of being stuck like that and finding that workaround has got to be super useful for what you do, especially with Chase Bliss, because when you started with them, you were starting around that time that the Warp Vinyl was out, but you were probably
right
headed into things like the Brothers, which was the first dual channel thing they did, the tonal control, which is, while being straightforward, it's still, if somebody wants an analog delay, but suddenly they have access to MIDI, it can be pretty daunting. But here we are now with things like Blooper and Mood that have some pretty, sometimes inscrutable MIDI commands and everything. It's very fascinating to kind of see how far even just simple single pedal MIDI control has come like that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you think about implementation on something like a warp vinyl, it's pretty simple, a gravitas. But yeah, the stuff we've been doing lately, it's getting a little crazy. Those MIDI manuals are getting longer to write, you know, for sure. Yeah. And the questions are getting more and more involved. It's, you know, I miss those questions about how do I clock a gravitas? It's like, well, here, done. Now it's like a 15-part question about how to like run a mood through your microwave in your kitchen and get the tone you're looking for. It's like, let me try to figure that out for you, you know?
This resonates deeply with me because during the beta process and the kind of development cycle for Blooper, I was one of those people sending you messages once every week.
Yeah.
Going, hey, is there going to be a MIDI CC control for this thing? Hey, am I going to be able to use MIDI to make the Blooper do these 4 things at the same time?
Right.
And amazingly, usually the answer is yes, which is really
that
cool.
helped a lot that you asked, because some of that stuff got on there. So
you gotta love that. See, you'll never unless you ask. And
right.
I'm very lucky when I'm asking those questions because my actual, and this isn't just because this is the panel we have, but my MIDI controller of choice is the Morningstar MC6, the MC8. I am a massive fan of that stuff. So I want to throw things over to Ben here and kind of ask, like, how did you get started down this kind of like MIDI foot controller path? I'm very curious to hear, because I actually don't know the answer to kind of how you ended up building these, what I would call very system agnostic MIDI controllers.
Right. Thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, glad you're enjoying your MC6 and MC8. So how we got started was that the creation of MIDI in the first place was for music by a universal language. So we felt that that's worked really well for synths, keyboards, and sequencers over the years. And in the most recent times, I believe MIDI has been used most commonly in the area of music production with DAWs, MIDI keyboards, and various control surfaces. But in the area of pedals and effects, we felt that there was some work that needed to be done because while MIDI is definitely much less commonly used as compared to other areas in the area of pedals and effects, we feel there's a huge untapped potential in this area. Because while MIDI is supposed to be a standard protocol, different effects and different pedals require different MIDI messages to control various functions. And unlike in a DAW like Ableton or Logic, most effect pedals don't have MIDI mapping capabilities. So that means each pedal would require a specific message to be sent to it to perform a desired function. So when we first began, we realized there weren't many fully programmable MIDI controllers that were compact and had an easy to use interface. So what was needed was a MIDI controller that could control any device, regardless of brand or model, by sending any combination of MIDI messages as dictated by the user. And that's how our first MIDI controller, the MC6, was born. And it didn't start as the product that it is today. I mean, it started just in the bedroom of my business partner, James, and just tinkering and the standard stuff. And we made them in really small batches. That was back when we had the Mark I. And at the start, you don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know if anyone's going to like it, how the market will respond. But glad to say that over the years, it's picked up and we've moved on to contract manufacturing now. So that's allowed us to scale and get into this. So, and we're also glad that in the past few years of us working to give musicians the best possible MIDI fit controller, more and more guitarists we kind of see on social media now are kind of willing to take the plunge and explore the benefits that MIDI has to offer them.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I remember, just for some context in this conversation, my first MIDI controller was the MC6, and I remember you guys reached out to me asking if I was interested in checking one out and kind of seeing how MIDI would kind of incorporate into my rig. And at this point, I had half a dozen Chase Bliss pedals and some Maris gear and all these different things that were MIDI capable. And I remember saying yes, going, I have no idea what I'm doing with MIDI. I have no sense of perspective on this. I've never done this before. I barely know how to manage presets on my faves from Chase Bliss. Like it was that level of kind of unknowability. But the desktop editor that you guys have that works with this was so useful and so helpful in terms of being able to kind of control things and to create your programs from the ground up. And I just found that to be wildly useful and kind of the thing that was the most foundational for me, getting from that kind of what Paul was talking about, that place of zero MIDI to that place of that essential first step kind of thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. So because the thing about the editor was we wanted to make it much easier and feasible for anyone to program their presets, because if you were to do it on the controller itself, it's definitely not something that can be done, especially with you needing to send multiple MIDI messages with a single switch and having to name your presets with just like the foot switch is quite impossible. So that's why we try to strike the balance between making something that's really powerful and flexible, yet still accessible by users. So which is why we created the editor. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I mean, you guys have also done a great job of, like I said earlier, when I got into MIDI, I was predominantly using Chase Bliss and Maris gear in terms of MIDI capable pedals. And the thing that people who use that gear will know is it's MIDI capable, but none of it is using that 5-pin MIDI format that is so common. Right. And what's fascinating is the MC6 is standard 5-pin MIDI in, MIDI out. And you would pair it into things like the Chase Bliss MIDI box and that kind of thing. And it's fascinating to see what you guys have done since then. So if you want to talk a little bit about the 8 and the new offering that you guys just announced.
Yes. Okay. So in the past, everyone was using 5-pin DIN connectors. I think because back when the protocol was implemented, they wanted to finish using these plugs that they have lying around. So, but I think in recent years, there's been a shift in the industry towards 1/4 inch because there's some space saving benefits and cost saving benefits as well. It's really commonly found, those TRS 1/4 inch jacks. And we wanted to do the same thing that we did for the MC8, which was have the ability to control multiple MIDI pedals that had 1/4 inch TRS MIDI on the MC3. But at the same time, it's tiny, so there wasn't much space on it, which is why we chose to go with 3.5 millimeter or 1/8 inch jacks on it. So that way we didn't make too much of a compromise, because these pedals that have 1/4 inch MIDI TRS, they typically don't have MIDI through. So if you just put one output on a MIDI controller, it kind of defeats the purpose of having it in the first place, because you still need a MIDI box. So we definitely wanted to have at least 4 individual 1/4 inch or TRS 3.5 millimeter outputs on each one. Yeah, so that was the decision-making process there.
That's awesome. Okay, and let's I'm very curious to hear the history of this. Let's go to Loki right here. Um, so modern 2020 guitar players who have seen your work will know the polydigit, the polybebo, these really robust multi-effect, MIDI capable, but also like shockingly powerful multi-effect pedals that have things like 4 inputs, 4 outputs discretely through TRS and all these amazing things. But having been at the trade shows for a while, I remember some of that poly-expressive stuff that you were doing. So I'm really curious to hear kind of where, like kind of the where, the why, the how of kind of your company's background.
Yeah, so I back about 20 years ago, I started off doing MIDI stuff, and because I started with my very first bit of musical gear that I kind of, I played violin and piano, and when I was a little kid, but when I was about 15, 16, I got this Roland MKS7, which is a rack mount journo, and I got it for $10 off somebody who didn't really know what it was. But the problem with starting with a rack mount synth with no keyboard or no knobs or anything is you have to work out how to do anything with it. So I very quickly got into MIDI because it was the only way I could control this bit of kit that I had, got for $10 and wanted to use. Because originally I just started pressing the front panel buttons and trying to do something with that. So I kind of went into MIDI, and then I always was trying to get more out of the MIDI standard. So my research at uni was always about how to have expressive control that's outside of just piano style control, because everything was so focused in MIDI around piano kind of stuff. And I wanted to move it into things like the kind of expression you can get from a double bass, continuous pitch stuff. So I kind of moved into that, and then started doing, because I was primarily bass and guitar player. So continued to move through that. Then really I was playing kind of bass with a friend who was playing synth stuff, and I was controlling all my effects from an Ableton push, like a thing with lots of buttons and knobs. So a traditional MIDI controller, but I had to take my hand off the instrument to get to those. Because I wanted to be able to do things like sweeps and change parameters and things like that, which I couldn't do from just foot switches. And all the MIDI controllers I could find at the time were just switches on and offs, really. So I wanted something I could do sweeps with. So that's why I built Expressive, so I could have things with 3-dimensional control with the pads. But then I found that there weren't that many pedals that had the flexibility I wanted, as far as being able to run lots of different things and have that full kind of modular synthesis environment, or like visual modular in a pedal form. So that's why I then went into making Digit and Bebo. And along the way, I kind of realized that Expressive was big, weird, and complicated. So, and hard to make. So I actually don't make the Expressives anymore. I just focus on the Digit and Bebo stuff.
Fair. Yeah, I remember those things, and I remember seeing kind of that simultaneous thing of very, very ambitious, and especially as a guitar player, very terrifying. Because anytime MIDI conversations, or even like synth pedals, like especially like comprehensive synth pedals, come into the conversation, I always find myself going, we guitar players are fundamentally cavemen, and anything remotely intricate on the digital side is truly terrifying.
Yeah, with Expressive, the only people bought really, which wasn't the market I was kind of expecting. And then pretty much everybody just wanted to change presets with them. They just wanted to be able to have a giant pile of presets on this giant pad. And I'm like, okay, that would be better with switches. I don't need a complicated pressure sensor for that. You just need switches. So I was like, there are lots of things that already do switches. Why not use switches? So yeah, that's why I kind of went into the other stuff. And then I realized that I could do some stuff with my previous synth stuff in Digit and Bebo.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's been a really interesting thing to see in some of your newest firmware updates and everything. For anybody who has seen the Digit and the Bebo and maybe watched a demo that is more than 2 or 3 weeks old, it is worth noting that that demo is probably somewhat out of date these days. Uh, you tend to push a lot of updates that are constantly introducing new features, new control concepts, and a lot of the time new aspects of the modular synth environment, which is its own very interesting side of the MIDI world, um, which is also a really interesting kind of talking conversational point. I don't know if anybody has anything to say on this, but the something that I've been really kind of fascinated with in the last year and a half or so has been not only the modular synth world, but how that modular synth world can kind of interact with the guitar player world. I know that you've introduced kind of the open source mutable stuff into some of your gear, but I also know that there are ways to make the two properly interact. Has anybody here really dove into that at all?
Well, yeah. Um, One of the big things with the modular interactions, like, so a lot of my customers are using modular synth gear. And a big question is, I've got MIDI in and out on the pedal on 3.5 mil, and type B, annoyingly. And a big question a lot of them have is whether can I do CV as well, control value? So that's quite a regular request, is CV in and out. And I'm like, well, I've already got MIDI. It's hard for me to fit CV on the pedal physically. Sure. So yeah, I'm kind of, yeah. And a lot of them ask, okay, so what can I do with the, can I do everything with the MIDI that I can with any of the other internal CV stuff? So that's a big interaction, is that CV versus MIDI.
Yeah, fair. That is one of the interesting things that, I mean, for me at least, goes really underutilized with a lot of the Chase Bliss stuff, is that you have CV inputs on a lot of that gear. It's fascinating to see kind of those worlds start to blend a little bit. Paul, I know that paying attention to the Chase Bliss side of the world, we see increasingly a ton of modular guys using Chase Bliss gear in that way.
Yeah.
An example of that would be Jogging House, amongst a lot of others. Yeah, go for it.
No, what was your question though?
More so, I don't know what my question is. I think it's just, I find it fascinating, and you guys are kind of the dudes who operate in that world on a deeper level than I have so far.
Yeah. Well, I think you started to go into like, am I seeing an increase in modular synth users with Chase Bliss? And that's definitely a fact. So much so that I am finding how little I know about CV. Mm-hmm. And I usually kick a lot of those questions to my coworker, who I've dubbed the CV guru, and that's Zach Warpinski at Chase Bliss. Yeah, I mean, stuff like blooper, mood. Yeah, CV guys are going crazy for that stuff. So it's out there. They're wanting to use it, and I need to learn it.
I know that feeling. I feel like there's a lot of this stuff that's the end of my sentence a lot of the time.
Right.
I definitely should add it.
Yeah. Well,
even just these days, MIDI feels so comprehensive that if you're not in the that modular kind of like hard synth Eurorack world, it seems like MIDI can accomplish so much of that stuff. I know that I've sat down, I don't think I've recorded anything with this, but just for my own personal like nerding out and everything, I have sat down and set up kind of like LFOs in the Digit that are then like probably like I've done it where I've had like I think 3 or 4 different LFOs all kind of modulating at different rates, sending 2 parameters on like the Chase Bliss preamp Mark II, that kind of thing, from Digit and Bebo over to that. And it's just like when you just sit there and you're playing and you're just watching the faders go, you're like, this is a different world than what I thought guitar was when I started into this previously.
Isn't that fun? Yeah.
So fascinating, which I think is an interesting conversation. I think a lot of guitar players, even if they don't know a lot about MIDI, they, what they do know is kind of, Paul, what you touched on early on, which is presets. Like, and I was the same way. I started on a Line 6 Pod HD
Yeah.
500. That
Hmm.
was my first.
Had one of those.
Yeah, after I had gotten past just guitar straight into amp, that was the first thing I had, was an HD 500.
Yep.
And you start building out your pedal board, and you're finding yourself going like, this all sounds better than the HD 500 does, in my opinion. Like, I'm able to
Right.
get the space that I want out of everything. I'm a firm believer that like Therme sounds better than almost any other delay and that kind of thing. And but you run up against those limitations of going, I don't have time to tap dance when
Right.
I'm trying that and everything. So that's kind of that base level MIDI of clocking and presets and everything. But between the three of you guys, I know that we've talked a lot about kind of deeper MIDI conversations. We've touched on that a little bit. Um, I guess the question would be like, if you're a guitar player and you maybe have a disaster area or an MC6 and you've kind of used it so far for preset control and kind of preset patch management, and you're going, there's got to be more I can do with this than just switching from my dotted eighth delay to my quarter note delay. Uh, what's next? What's the thing that the guitar that like you, I just may not have thought about yet that excites you about MIDI as a guitar player?
Me?
Anybody. This is open.
Uh, I'm getting a lot of emails where like, okay, say on a Chase Bliss pedal, you can bounce or ramp parameters. You can like bounce to certain parts on a knob, say from noon to full counterclockwise. But what if somebody wants to go from like, they want to do something in between there, or they want to bounce all around on that knob? You can do that with CC messages. So that was kind of one of the first things I started to experiment with a MIDI controller beyond presets, was like modulating different CCs, which I think I started doing that on like Condor, the Chase Bliss Condor, because I wanted just like some of that crazy, and it's cool. Like modulating CCs is one of the coolest things ever. And
Yeah, that's great on the Condor with the filter sweeping. Because
Yeah.
if you send all of the internal control voltage stuff from Digit and Bebo, so there's maybe 20 different modules that can generate or change control voltages, internal controls. Then you can route them out to MIDI, so you can have an LFO controlling the filter sweep on a Condor. And those are fun because the Condor filters sound nice and then they get swept. Or you can then make them, there's a drum pattern generator in there, so you can make them, have crazy patterns and then ADSRs and envelopes and all of those things on the MIDI messages that go out. So I've done that a bit with the Impress Phaser, because it doesn't have built-in presets either.
right.
So you can't send program change messages to it, but you can send CCs, so you can just make the presets out of CCs and then modulate them as you want.
You're talking about, it's okay if I just jump right in here. So if you're talking about going past recording presets and using CCs to control individual parameters, I think something that's pretty exciting and interesting in the guitar world now that can be implemented with MIDI is actually now more and more bands are using backing tracks when they perform. And Morningstar MIDI controllers actually allow users to control both their pedal boards and music software, such as Ableton, Mainstage, or Logic at the same time. And it's just not a user group that we have been actively targeting yet, but we already have some recording studios who are using Ableton to automate preset changes on their pedal boards. So that means they don't even have to touch their pedal board and start to activate a song just by what Ableton tells their pedal board to do through the Morningstar MIDI controller. So that's kind of like super cool, next level stuff.
I was chatting to Pliny, the Australian guitarist, a year or two ago, and he said that his whole stage set is Logic pushing MIDI messages and stuff like that. So it's all pre-worked out, so he doesn't actually change anything from the floor. That's really interesting to use MIDI like that.
Yeah, I feel like I remember 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I know people who kind of grew up touring in that era when like you would literally have like your guitar tech backstage waiting for the cue and then hitting a bunch of pedals all at the same time. It's fascinating to know that you can now just kind of automate all of that.
Mm.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's beyond just preset recall. It's automated preset recall across an entire set. That's fascinating. Okay, yeah, let's think here. Is there, I guess, a good question is like, rather than me kind of trying to prompt things that I've thought about with MIDI, considering I'm probably the least knowledgeable MIDI person at the table here, is there, what about the format, what about the MIDI standard, I think, is something that if you were trying to kind of convey things to guitar players watching this, who kind of decided to sit in on this conversation, they're probably, especially if we're talking about like pushing the boundaries with MIDI and everything, what is it that I think is exciting that maybe a guitar player should start implementing now, that kind of thing? Like, what's the motivating factor there?
Right. Okay, I'm just going to take this one.
Sure.
I think some of the audience here probably, they might not be familiar with MIDI or not even use MIDI in their rigs yet, but just kind of like curious about what it can do for them as guitar players. So yeah, I just want to give a sort of brief introduction of what MIDI can do for guitarists, just at the very basic level at the start, and why anyone would get into it in the first place. Right, so in the guitar effects world, there are typically two types of users, as Paul and Mark have both mentioned: the digital multi-effects user and the mix and match pedalboard user. And it was usually either or, and sometimes guitarists go back and forth between these two camps because they want to try something new, also known as gear accumulation syndrome. And so each of these camps had their own benefits, but the most glaring one was that multi-effects units allowed guitarists to easily create presets and recall them with the touch of a switch, while a mix and match pedalboard couldn't. So while you got to enjoy a vast selection of stellar effects on a mix and match board, it just simply wasn't that convenient when it came to saving and recalling the tones you create. So that's the less practical side of it. But now with MIDI, you essentially create your own multi-effects board using different pedals of your choice. So you can tweak your tone until you've gotten a sound you like, and then you save a preset on your MIDI controller, and you can recall it anytime you want. So that way you aren't limited to using effects from only one company, like you are when using a multi-effects processor. Everything from your overdrives, fuzzers, distortions to your modulation are all from the same company, and that might not be what is ideal for you. So in this aspect, a mix and match pedalboard is great, because I'm sure you'd prefer the reverb of, say, builder A over builder B's, and maybe the delay of one builder over another. And now with the added convenience of MIDI, you can create presets on the pedalboard and also change parameters on the fly. So other than being able to save and recall complex sounds with a single switch press, MIDI also allows you to sync all your time-based effects with MIDI clock. And yeah, so all Morningstar MIDI controllers have built-in MIDI clock and can send clock data out to all connected devices. So they allow users to tap in a BPM in real time or send a preset BPM for each preset. Yeah, so that's kind of like the basic users for MIDI for guitarists who have not started using MIDI.
There we go. I mean, hopefully that right there is kind of that low-level motivation that people need. That was basically why I got started in it. So I think a good question to ask here, especially with you guys, MIDI obviously is a much more common, prevalent thing in the synth world. This year, I'm not good at keeping up on this stuff. This year, the conversation about MIDI 2.0 has become pretty prevalent in terms of what it will mean for the synth world, being able to fine-tune analog synths on a level that is kind of pretty unprecedented, microtonal stuff, that kind of thing. What, if anything, does MIDI 2.0 offer to guitar players? Is that a question that has an answer yet, or are we in uncharted territory?
For our stuff, for the poly stuff, there are useful things. So I'd previously done stuff kind of related to MIDI 2.0 with the MPE, the MIDI polyphonic expression, which was kind of a in-between from MIDI 1 to MIDI 2.0. I mean, the best thing about the recent changes to MIDI are the 3.5 mil standard, because now there's an official standard for what a TRS connector should be, and that's just fantastic. It's slightly annoying that I chose the wrong one to begin with. All the current poly stuff is Type B connectors, so the same as Chase Bliss, because I thought Chase Bliss, had chosen a good choice, so I chose the same as them. But yeah, as far as the features for 2, one of the possible advantages of having CV in and out is the kind of arbitrary range. I mean, a lot of CV converters will probably only be the same range as MIDI anyway, because they might be 8-bit converters or something. But you can now easily express higher bit rates if you want, and you're somewhat less constrained about how much data you need to be able to push. If you are pushing a lot of modulators, which Digit can do, out. The only challenge for me that I'm wondering about in that is connectivity, because if a lot of the USB 2 standard is focused around, the MIDI 2 standard is focused around USB. And even though I've got USB ports on Digit and Bebo, currently I don't support MIDI in and out over the USB ports, because I'll have to write a driver for that. And then you lose the optical isolation, which is nice, because the normal MIDI, the TRS jacks are optically isolated, so you can't get ground loops with them, whereas the MIDI jacks aren't. Sorry, the USB MIDI ones won't be, because USB isn't isolated. So I think there are advantages to things moving to the MIDI 2 stuff, but the big disadvantage I think will be if it's only USB, because that's just a more annoying standard for guitar pedals to have to fit onto a pedal.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Anybody else, any thoughts on MIDI 2.0? No? All right, we're good. That's fair. I remember having a conversation with MIDI 2.0 with Andy Pitcher, who was at Red Panda at the time, and he was very excited about it, and I felt very out of my depth. But I think that's kind of the fun part about MIDI conversations with guitar players is you've got some guys who really go down that rabbit hole very effectively, and some people who kind of want to just play the guitar, I guess. Okay. Let's see. I guess let's just I don't know. Let's open the floor a little bit. We're coming to the end of this, so I guess if anybody has any kind of final closing thoughts on MIDI, whether it's kind of a plea for MIDI or a just something that they kind of want people to know that we maybe haven't covered yet.
I'd love to ask Paul what people mostly get confused about with MIDI. I know what the usual questions I get, but my users are either the how do I clock this against other stuff, or how do I change presets, or how do I use this with my crazy synth collection?
Hands down, the biggest question I get from early MIDI users, and maybe it's because we're TRS MIDI, and our MIDI is actually on the ring of the TRS, which technically isn't the standard, but I like it. You like it.
I just chose it because you did.
Wow, thank you.
No, it was the wrong choice.
But it's a fun choice. It makes you feel like you're doing your own thing, and why not? But yeah, I think the most numerous question I get from first-time users is like, how do I connect all this stuff? So I started a new series called MIDI Unscripted on the Chase Bliss channel, and the video for that an hour long of just how to connect any MIDI controller to a Chase Bliss pedal. I even do things like MIDI box the Maris IO, which is kind of like a no-no, but I broke it down and showed how to make that happen. Took it apart and did some crazy science stuff with it. But yeah, it's just that first hurdle of connecting it. I mean, honestly, you can't even start until it's connected, right? So a lot of people stop right there, you know, and you don't have to. It's actually not, I don't want to say it's not hard because then it makes me feel bad that I'm putting people down, but it's hard, but it's not hard. Contact me. I'll walk you through it.
Awesome. I like that question a lot. Ben, what's the most common question that you get when it comes to MIDI?
Yeah, so we used to actually get lots of questions by email, and it's really just difficult to keep up with all the emails. It was getting a bit tough because it's not just one email where you answer them and okay, I got it, thanks very much. It's you answer them and they say, oh wait, I got one more, but then what if I want to do this now? You know, what would I have to do? So what we've done is we've actually created a series of YouTube tutorials to kind of like just be able to copy and paste and send it to our users when they email us. I think some of the common questions that we get are just firstly how to connect all the stuff together. Just because for a first-time user, they're not even sure how MIDI works, right? And they don't even know that MIDI can be daisy chained through different devices. They think they need more than one output just to control multiple devices, but little do they know that they can be daisy chained. And the next one would probably be how to use MIDI clock. So we have written blog posts and articles and created videos for all these things, just so that it's much more scalable to be able to support our customers. And yeah, I think other than that, there are a bit more complicated stuff that people need. Yeah, some of them, they want to change banks on their MIDI controller while sending out MIDI messages. So that's more of like feature requests. And we take our users' feature requests quite seriously as well, because we really want to listen to what people need. And if it's feasible and we think it makes sense, we definitely try to push out updates as quickly as possible for them.
This is, I've got a somewhat MIDI adjacent thing that, you know, obviously I get the same kind of questions about syncing and stuff like that, and I get note questions because of the synth people. But one thing I've been contemplating is Ableton Link or something like that for tempo syncing, because you can do multi-master sync then. The idea would be that you could have multiple people in a band, like the bass player, the drummer, and the guitarist could all have access to syncing the tempo, and any of them could tap in the tempo for everybody in the band. So that's something I've been thinking of. I've been planning to add to my stuff, but it's tempo sync that exists outside of the MIDI thing, but then converts to MIDI.
Right. Interesting that you should mention that, because that
I thought
reminds
you might
me. Yeah, that reminds me now that we used to get this request for people who wanted to use Ableton to send MIDI to their MIDI controller and then sync up the rest of the pedal board. But the reason that we couldn't do that was that MIDI clock was quite a sensitive kind of data, so it doesn't translate well from USB and then out to 5-pin, because any action you take on the MIDI controller will kind of interrupt the message and it'll kind of mess up the MIDI clock. So we're in the process of adding a feature where the MIDI controller actually takes the MIDI clock data from Ableton, and that MIDI clock sets its internal MIDI clock and then it sends it out instead of relaying it. So in that way, we can do what you mentioned, sync up your pedal board using like a common master clock from Ableton.
Yeah, so Link, the Ableton Link stuff is, they've got their own system for multi-master tap tempo and multi-master tempo. So MIDI requires this, you know, you have to have a single master and then slaves for clock, but the other one, you can have multiple masters, which is kind of interesting, but I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to stick that into things yet and how it interacts with the MIDI stuff.
Right.
But it's a future craziness.
Yeah.
I had a thought listening to that conversation, which was I just all of a sudden had this thought when we were talking about clock syncing and just kind of the different ways that things are implemented. My mind went rushing back to this moment where I had my Zoya running with the MC6 and at the time the Gravitas from Chase Bliss, and I was using the Zoya to do a like 5-step sequence, sending different ramps, like different rate speeds to the tremolo speed. Just a cool kind of like pattern trem that changed. And then I found that if I took that same patch and modified it so that it was sending that same pattern to the Chase Bliss mood on the clock, you ended up with this very bizarre pitch shifting up and down rhythmic thing that was just the most bizarre, fascinating, like polyphonic, crazy thing that I really loved. And it made me kind of wonder. All of you guys have spent a lot of your professional life playing with MIDI stuff. Paul, you troubleshooting MIDI connectivity and all these things. What's the weirdest MIDI fix, the most memorable thing you've come up with using MIDI? Like what's the thing that you went, oh, holy crap, I can do this with MIDI. This is dope. Whether it's as specific as ramping the clock on the mood really specifically, or the weirdest like daisy chaining to make your toaster recall presets on your Mercury 7.
Well, I got a two-part answer. So first I'll say what I was going to say first is lately using Ribbon on the iPad with Bluetooth MIDI into the Preamp Mark II, which I show a little bit of in my MIDI deep dive video. So modulating the gate on the fuzz, which basically I'm turning it off, gated, and then open, off, gated, open, like those three in rapid succession, which like on paper sounds like that would be stupid, but then you hear it, it's like freaking crazy. And then you slowly ramp the or bounce the frequency fader. So you have this like, it's like, yeah, let me try to make that with my mouth. It doesn't work. So, but I mean, try to do that without MIDI, you know, it's just like, it's not going to happen. And then I think the other part of the answer, like you said about daisy chaining, one time I took every single delay pedal I have in my studio, which I think at the time was like 29 delay pedals, and I ran clock through all of them. Not all of them had MIDI, so some of them I had to like set manually, and then just like played through it all. And it was like the coolest reverb ever. It made like a reverb, like 29 delay pedals. So those are a couple cool things.
Loki, Ben?
Do it without MIDI, right?
Of course.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
I think if we're talking about Loki, you go first.
Oh, thank you. I think one or two of the cool ones is, well, one of the cool ones recently, I think, was seeing the LFOs from Bebo going into the automaton, the Chase Bliss preamp, and just seeing, you know, I don't know, there's something joyful about the electronic data being converted into this physical movement and also sound. I just kind of liked seeing them moving and being like, oh, look, it's a thing that moves. I thought that was kind of magic. And then, you know, being able to, you know, control things from there, because then with the internal control voltage stuff in Bebo, you can like add voltages to something or squish them or, clip them and things like that. And you could really easily see how it was changing, how the faders were moving. And it was just kind of, you know, fun to see that. I thought that was kind of, you know, just interesting and kind of spectacular.
There is
but the other,
yeah, faders go.
Yeah, there's a certain joy to it. I think the other one I really enjoyed was with the back when I was using the Expressive and combining it with the Condor and I think the Pigtronics Ecolution was the delay I was using it with. Being able to have the resonance and the cutoff on one XY, and then the level A on the Z. And so I was kind of moving between all of these parameters. It was shaping the guitar sounds as I was, you know, squishing between all of them on the different pedals as well. So the different pedals having different parameters changed. And yeah, so you kind of, you know, sweeping through all of this and getting a sound that wouldn't have been possible without this kind of MIDI interaction with a single expression pedal or something.
Awesome. Ben?
Oh yeah. So this is kind of like something that's still in development, and we just kind of did it for fun to see if we could do it. And that's a MIDI CC waveform generator that is sent from our MIDI controller. So instead of you like using your expression pedal to like do this all the time, you just hit a switch and it oscillates. It's like oscillating up and down between two CC values. So when we plugged it in and we tried it with some of our pedals, like setting the filter mix to it, you can create kind of like a side chain effect. Yeah, and if you can sync that oscillation to your MIDI clock as a master clock, then you can kind of get interesting sounds. And of course, we connected it to the Preamp Mark II that we got as well. And it was just cool to see it just like bounce up and down on its own. So at the moment, we have linear or sine shapes and sawtooth. So we're working on that. It's kind of interesting. I would say not really so much in the usable phase yet, because at the moment it just goes from 0 to 127 CC values. But we think that there's something there, and probably work on it and try to make it something more user-friendly and something more useful, I guess.
That's awesome. That's such a fun aspect of kind of comprehensive control.
Yeah.
Kind of related to that, I was thinking about this the other night, about using the Brothers as a compressor, because with the digital, the Bebo, you can have an envelope follower, and then you can send that out over MIDI. So then you can control the level of the Brothers or the gain. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, either of the channels or the mix, any of those, I think, from the envelope. So then you could actually have it kind of function as a compressor by changing its parameters, or even exaggerate your expression, your change in volume, which I haven't tried yet. I don't know what the kind of how quickly it reacts to changes there and how much it smooths. So I don't know if that'd actually work. So Paul, you'll have to see if that actually is a thing that's possible. I don't know.
Yeah. So like, are you adjusting the CC on the volume as the note decays? Is that sort of what you're doing to bring it out? Yeah. Huh. That's an awesome, I never even thought of that. That's awesome.
I only thought of it the other day, and I'm like, this is the thing I could do, because we do it internally. Like it's easy. Obviously, I route that to modules inside Bebo, but I only just realized I'm like, oh, I could make any gain pedal a compressor.
Wow.
And then, because most compressors only compress in terms of volume, really changing volume. But if you change gain instead, or or bias or something like that, you could get some kind of interesting effects. And I was like, I wonder what it sounds like if, I'm changing one of these other parameters on some, like, because the Preamp Mark II has so many different, characteristics to control. I mean, I don't know if that'd be weird, because I don't know if you can turn off make faders move. But it'd work on the Brothers really nicely.
See?
It's an idea I had.
See, kids, go get MIDI.
I don't know if it'll work. It's an idea I had. I don't know how well it works.
It works on paper. It's working in my brain right now.
Well, try it on your brain. Try it in the thing.
Yeah.
So, just kind of wrapping things up here. I think first of all, thank you guys for joining me on this. This was a very cool, fascinating discussion. Kind of great to hear what's in development and kind of all of you guys' perspectives on MIDI in this context and everything. I'm especially excited about this concept that I never have to buy a compressor again if I just get really interested in my MIDI. But so I guess as we close out here, what's next for each of you guys? What should people be on the lookout for?
You guys go first. I got to think about this one.
Ben, what do the people need to know?
I can't really say right now. But
Same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think since we've just launched the MC3, I think we're quite excited about that. We did the whole promo video thing, but I think what we need to do next is a proper product walkthrough so that users know exactly what it can do. It's not just a watered down version of the bigger brothers. And Yeah, I think we are quite keen to push the development of MIDI towards 3.5 millimeter jacks, just because like you can save quite a bit of space, and MIDI isn't something that you plug in and out that often, and the diameter of the cable doesn't really affect the signal flow that much.
Right.
Like audio, you need like low impedance kind of stuff. So yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do with the MC3. In terms of future developments, I will just drop a hint here, and I think we're looking at working. We have the ML5 loop switcher that is MIDI control, so you can control your audio loops with MIDI. We are planning to release one that allows users to reorder the loops as well. So I think that's a request that we've gotten quite a bit from our users. So working on that.
Loki, what can you share?
Just going to be building these as fast as I can at the moment. So,
Fair.
I'm just in my garage soldering all day. So yeah, no, I'm just assembling them. Obviously, I'm trying to take maybe one day a week to do some firmware updates. This year I've released 43, I think, firmware updates.
Wow.
So
Wait, did you say this year? This year?
Yeah, 43 this year. Yeah.
You have been in lockdown.
But I'm kind of getting to the stage where there's a couple of really fun ones coming up really soon. There's this random modulation module that I'm going to do soon. So that's going to be fun over MIDI as well. Just there's a lot more control voltage generators that you can then feed out to MIDI. So there's a new sequencer coming that I've most of the way through. So that's going to come. So obviously, all of those things are things you can either target to the internal modules or external ones. But yeah, I have about, I have 30 more modules on my to-do list for Digit and Bebo. So,
You're a true genius.
chucking. No, I make some poor choices, but I use the Type B connector instead of the Type A connector.
Email about that.
So yeah. But yeah, I think just the same stuff, but more of it is my current plan.
All right, Paul, or is it all top secret?
Yeah, man, there's top secret stuff. I'll just say that's enough, right? That there is stuff coming. On a personal note, for those of you that were watching my MIDI unscripted videos, I did those while I was in lockdown and wasn't going to the regular day job. And then the day job opened back up and summer happened and I've been camping a lot. And so more MIDI unscripted videos are coming now that I'm going to have the time to do that. So we can watch out for those, right?
Awesome. And that's a good jumping off point. As we close things out, let's go around really quick. And where do the people find you? Instagrams, websites. Let's get those plugs in. Ben, you want to start us off?
Yeah, we're on all platforms. We have our website, we have Instagram, Facebook, YouTube channel as well. It's all Morningstar Engineering. Yeah, you can visit us at morningstar.io. You get links to everything there. We post quite regularly on YouTube and on social media, so we'd love to see you guys there.
Loki?
It's Poly Effects, the full word. Yeah, and that's on all of the things, Instagram, etc. Yeah, and I try and post little videos and stuff of what's going on. I am contemplating, now that I've tried this whole streaming thing, and given the lockdown here in Melbourne, it's good to get some occasional human interaction. I'm contemplating starting streaming, so just so I can have like direct interaction with some of the customers and give some feedback and ask questions, get questions directly. So I'm thinking about doing that too. We'll see what happens with that. But yeah, otherwise on all the platforms, yeah, and you can always just look at our website, place we can.
Perfect. And Paul?
Same here. You can find me. I have a YouTube channel, Instagram. It's Paul Uhl. Last name is spelled UHL. You can type that in and find it everywhere. ChaseBlissAudio.com, of course. Chase Bliss is on Instagram as well. Yeah, we're out
Awesome.
there.
Thank you guys so much for joining me for this. Everybody watching online here, I hope you guys found some inspiration, some motivation, or a certain sense of mad scientist that I think a lot of these guys share in a meaningful way. I am Mark Johnston. You can follow me at Mark Johnston on pretty much all the platforms or on Ambient Notes on Instagram. For guitar.com Live 2020, thank you for joining us. Have a good one.